Welcome to Business Legal Lifecycle TV, the live TV show all about the legal aspects of your business to help educate you on complex legal terms in an easy to understand manner, to help understand why you need to do certain things in your business from a legal point of view, and to help you develop a plan for the future. Our mission at Business Legal Lifecycle is to help empower all small to medium-sized businesses around the world to get access to legal advice so that they can help build their communities and make the world a better place. Did you know that any business owner is on average 7 months away from losing everything? That is the average time it takes from a successful business to fold when an aspect of their business is not set up correctly. Have you ever wanted to get legal advice but didn't understand what was going on? Do you feel like there is a divide between lawyers and their clients? Then this TV show is for you. It is all about empowering you and your business with the knowledge and tools to ensure that this doesn't happen to you. Business Legal Lifecycle TV delivers a twice-weekly show focusing on the legal aspects of your business. At lunchtime on Mondays, we present Fast Fix Monday, a quick 5 to 10 minute show that will give you some actionable steps to consider for the week for your business. And at lunchtime on Wednesdays, we present our in-depth show of between 30 minutes and an hour, where we go through complicated legal aspects of your business in a simple to understand, plain English manner. And whether that is through educational pieces or interviews with experts in their fields.
Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Business Legal Lifecycle TV. Today is Wednesday, so it's one of our longer form shows, and today is our interview type show that we interview someone. Today's show, which we do once a month, is where it's a training show, and we're in this instance talking about phase 1 conception, and the person that we're actually interviewing is one of the founders of Business Legal Lifecycle, Jeremy Stretton. If you want to say hello to everyone, Jeremy, before we kick into the interview questions for today.
Hi everyone, looking forward to this. I enjoy being quizzed by you, Craig, so it's going to be lots of fun.
Absolutely. Well, I've got a few curly questions for you today, so hopefully you're on your toes. So as I said, we're talking about phase 1 conception.
Yep.
And the first question I had is, why is it important to know what you are doing at the beginning of your business?
Yeah, this is a great question. It's something that we've talked about quite a bit on Business Legal Lifecycle TV, but I think it's really important. So I'll give a bit of a long-winded answer, but it's really about knowing where you're going. So anyone who's read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey will know that, I think it's the second or third one, is begin with the end in mind. The reason that Stephen talks about that is the fact that if you don't know where you're going, how are you ever going to know how to get there? So if you think about it this way, if you're getting in a car and going for a drive and you want to go to Melbourne, if you don't know that you want to go to Melbourne, then you could end up in Perth, or you could end up in Darwin, or you could end up in wherever. You could end up a suburb away. So you need to know where you're going. We talk about it in terms of startup with an end in mind. And the reason that we do that is very deliberate. And that's about the fact that when you start business, when you start anything that you're going to be doing in life, really, you've got to have an end in mind. You may not know where you're actually going to end up. And that's normal. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a very normal way of life. But you need to begin with an end in mind, so you have some trajectory of where you're going. Because if you don't, then you will never know how to get there. So really thinking about what you're doing is really important. So coming back to the actual question, why is it important to know what you are doing at the beginning of a business? It really changes the fundamentals of how you structure yourself and how you structure what you're doing to actually get in there and start the business. So you need to know what you're doing right at the beginning, and you need to know that might change, but starting off with that is starting off with end in mind. So that's why that's really important, Craig.
Absolutely. All right, so you've got your end in mind, or an end in mind. So as part of that, you've then got to work out how you're going to actually start your business. So what are the key differences between, say, a business purchase, where you're buying an existing business, or where you start your own business from scratch?
So a business purchase, this is really talking about buying a business that's existing, that it might have been existing for a week, or it might have been existing for 10 years, or so, or whatever period of time. But when you buy a business, you're really buying a business from someone who would have been in phase 11 of the business legal lifecycle, which is sale of the whole or part of the business. So it's really important to remember that whether or not the person is selling the business consciously, when you're buying it, you're really in phase one because you're looking at the beginning of the business. And really all of the legal aspects of the business that we discuss throughout the life cycle are really about building yourself up to that sale of business. So when you're looking at a business to buy, you really need to think about it in terms of, well, what do they have in place in relation to the business legal life cycle? Have they been through the phases? Have they set up their business correctly? Have they got their employment contracts? Have they been through that whole process? That's really important. That comes into your due diligence when you buy a business. With a new business, you're really starting it from scratch. It's what Craig and I did when we started our law firm, Stretton Mason Lawyers, is you start from scratch. And you basically need to start from the beginning of the business legal life cycle, whether or not you've started a business before or whether where you're up to, you really need to start from the beginning. So you need to think about all of the things that we talk about in phase one and then take yourself through. So, in phase one, costs are really at a premium as well. And you're going to need to make sure that you can afford what you need to do to start your business. So you need to get really good cost-effective advice to make sure that what you're doing is correct. And this can be the case even if you have investors in your business. When investors invest or inject funds into the business, they want to see a result. So you need to think about, well, how are you going to actually provide them with that result? So those are the main differences between a business purchase, Craig, and a new business.
Excellent. All right. And so you touched on some of them, but what do you see as the key advantages and disadvantages for those two approaches?
Yes, I'll talk about it in two different aspects. The first is from a commercial point of view. So from a commercial point of view, when you're buying a business, you're really buying something that's pre-existing. It should have a pre-existing client or customer base. It should have pre-existing systems, intellectual property. So you're really buying something that's pre-existing, and that is a disadvantage for a new business, because if you're buying a business, then you've got those things already set up. If you're starting a new business, then you don't, and you need to actually set up all of that from scratch. By the same token, that can also be an advantage for a new business, that if you've got your systems and processes in place from a previous business owner, you may not like how they've done it. You may not like their clients. They may not be your ideal client. So you need to look at that from both aspects, that with a new business, a key advantage can be a disadvantage for a business purchase. And that's where it comes really into thinking about the end in mind, and where you're actually heading off with it. So from a legal point of view, when you're buying an existing business, one of the key advantages is that it's got an existing structure, as I said before, from a commercial point of view, but it's also got pre-existing trading. So from a legal point of view, that can be a good thing. That can also be a bad thing if there's any liabilities attached to it. And a key advantage of starting a new business from a legal point of view is that, you start from scratch and you can set up the structures and entities the way that you want to, not the way that someone else had it. And that can save you a lot of money in the long run. And a key disadvantage of starting a new business really is around the same piece as what I said before. From a legal point of view, it's the fact that you're starting from scratch. You don't have any real customers or clients, any systems or processes. So that can be a disadvantage, because you've got to build all that and you've got to spend time throughout the early phases of the life cycle of your business actually setting all those things up.
Absolutely. All right, excellent. I wanted to move on to another topic, and that's regarding confidentiality agreements. Mm-hmm. It's an agreement that is pretty important in this area. If you could explain for our viewers and listeners what exactly is a confidentiality agreement, and also as part of that, perhaps a couple of examples of where you might encounter a confidentiality agreement when you're thinking about this particular phase, as in conception phase one.
Yeah, great question. And I think you're right, Craig. This is a really important topic. So a confidentiality agreement is an agreement that protects you or someone else's confidential information. For instance, if you have a great and unique idea, then that is something that you want to keep confidential. Or if you have a successful business that you're looking to sell, you may have other information about the systems and processes or the people or the clients that you want to keep confidential. So in business and commercial negotiations, there is no obligation on either party to keep any information that they have been provided confidential. So where you put a confidentiality agreement in place, it basically protects that information. Now, these are really important to get right. Defining what confidential information is really key, because you've got to make sure that it covers what you actually want it to cover, and that it doesn't just have some broad brush that tries to cover everything. And do not, I cannot stress this enough, do not use one that you find off the internet, especially if it's referring to other laws. So it's so scary that we see agreements that come from, the US or the UK in Australia, or vice versa, that haven't been written in the proper laws for their country, and that can actually mean that they're completely unenforceable. So confidentiality agreements protect your confidential information that isn't normally protected at law or in law, and so you need to make sure that if you have intellectual property that you want to protect, that you actually have an agreement in place. So some examples of where you might encounter a confidentiality agreement in phase one. So if you're starting a new business and you have a unique or novel idea, that idea might be something that you want to protect when you start talking to consultants. You might, if it's a patentable idea, you might want to go and talk to a patent attorney. You want to have an agreement in place. If you're talking to investors, then you might want to have a confidentiality agreement in place to protect those ideas. If you're buying a business from someone else, then normally they will want you to sign a confidentiality agreement, because when you're buying a business, you will get information such as client lists, employee lists, information about prices. All of that information is really the intellectual property of a business that is being sold, and so they'll want to protect it. So it's very normal that you will have to sign a confidentiality agreement if you're buying a business. And if you're doing that, then make sure that you get that reviewed by a lawyer. And if you're watching this and you're selling a business, make sure you get it drafted by a lawyer as well. Again, don't use the internet versions. They're not up to scratch yet. And you can get some really generic agreements that just aren't binding. So they're probably the two main examples, Craig, of where you might encounter a confidentiality agreement in phase one.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, thank you for that. That's good examples. In terms of, so you mentioned that it's an important document, and you've given some examples of where it is important. Are there any other reasons as to why a confidentiality agreement is important to have in place?
Yep, yeah, absolutely. So, look, these are very important documents, and they're not something to be taken lightly. So where you provide confidential information to another person, and they use that information to your detriment, you need to be able to stop them. A properly drafted confidentiality agreement will give you, as the owner of that information, the ability to go to court and force the third party to stop using the information. And it could even give you the ability to recover damages for any loss that you suffer if you breach that agreement. So, keeping your information secret can be important to protect the uniqueness of your idea and your business, so that no one else can just simply go and copy it. Generally, you don't need these type of agreements where you're engaging the services of the specialist consultant. So I said before, patent attorneys, but if you're engaging a lawyer or accountant, they've got no interest in stealing your ideas, so you won't need to get them to sign a confidentiality agreement unless you're really paranoid. And if you are, I'd probably suggest that you probably should look for another consultant because they have ethical rules and regulations which actually stop them from stealing information, and ultimately they have their own business interests. So the other thing to think about is that it's really important at the beginning of the business to define who actually owns the idea. So this is probably the third main reason for actually having a confidentiality agreement. If you want to protect your intellectual property and have it owned by a separate legal entity, then it can be disastrous if you have these agreements drafted with the wrong parties. And they can actually be good evidence of who owns intellectual property in the future. So what I'm talking about here is when we get to phase 5, we talk about owning intellectual property in another entity. And what we're talking about here is actually, if you decide to do that early on, then a confidentiality agreement that's properly drafted can actually be evidence that that intellectual property isn't owned by a trading entity, that it might be actually owned by a third party entity that actually is designed to own your intellectual property. So you need to think about all those things when you're starting up, it's they're pretty important agreements to have in place.
Indeed. Now, you've acted for a number of clients that have required confidentiality agreements. So I'd like you to, if you can think of one, and I expect you to, an example of where the confidentiality agreement was used, the reasons behind that, as a real life example.
Yeah, so I think examples are really good to give people the context of how these things work. So the example that I have in mind is it's a glass material supplying business. So they provide glass to job sites around Australia. And they were recently looking at selling the business, and it had been really successful for well over a decade, and it was run by a family team, primarily a father and son. And the business it still employs around 100 staff and had large contracts with really a lot of the large significant building contractors. So if you think about the glass that goes into high-rise buildings, these guys supply that glass. That's their primary business. The father decided that he wanted to retire, and so they decided that they wanted to actually wanted to sell the business because the son didn't want to keep on operating it if the father was no longer there. So given the size of the business, it was clear that they had to engage the services of an experienced business broker to help them sell their business. However, they were very concerned that their competitors or a staff member, if they found out that they were selling, that they could basically go and steal a bunch of contracts because it's a very small market. So the business was advertised without a name, and without a name of the company being revealed. And that's often the case with these businesses that you want to protect. So before a prospective buyer could find out any information about the business, they first had to sign a confidentiality agreement, which was through a website with the business broker. Once that was signed, they were then provided with a confidentiality agreement that we drafted to ensure that the rest of the information that was provided was confidential. So the reason that was necessary was that our client wanted to keep their name confidential at the beginning. So they didn't want to provide all the information to any prospective buyers, so they didn't know who was selling. And then once that information was kept confidential, then the information about the business was also kept confidential through a second agreement. So you really need to think about these things. And the reason I give this example is it's really important. One of the other clients that we do a lot of work for is a broker who sells real estate agencies. And he has a similar process where he will require a prospective buyer to sign a confidentiality agreement through his website before he provides the name of that business. And then a further confidentiality agreement is provided to the prospective buyer once they know the details of the name of the seller, so that we can protect their business going forward. So Craig, that's probably two examples, but I think it's really important for people to understand why we need to have these agreements and what they actually mean.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing those examples. So moving on to another topic, is regarding planning. So we see planning is pretty important in any phase of a business. We do a lot of planning as to what our goals are, etc. Why do you need a plan and setting goals when we're talking about phase one specifically?
Yeah, I talked about this before. I probably went a bit off topic before, but anyway, for the question. But it really comes back to starting up with an end in mind. As I said before, if you don't set your goals and you don't know where you're going, then how are you going to get there? You need to understand that these things change. Another great analogy is the fact that the space shuttle on the first trip to the moon, it was on track 3% of the time. 3% of the time that it was traveling between the Earth and the Moon, it was on track 3% of the time. And why does that matter? Well, it shows that they had a goal in mind. They knew where they were heading to, and they were able to adjust what they were doing on a regular basis to make sure that they got there. If they didn't have the goal in mind, if they were just going to go to space and travel around and see what was out there, then who knows where they would have ended up. They probably would have ended up in Mars, or probably out of the solar system, or dead, unfortunately. So setting goals and having a plan of how you're going to get there are really, really important for those reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. And as part of that planning, when you're first starting out, we say it a lot in our shows here at Business Legal Lifecycle TV, but who should be in your initial team?
Yeah, and as you said, we did talk about this a bit in our education show earlier this month. We went through these different team members, but the three most important ones for every business when they start out are an accountant, And an accountant is someone who can provide you with structure advice, tax advice, and really the advice to make sure that you get the money that you deserve. Different accountants have different approaches, and there's nothing wrong with that. Different accountants might deal with things differently, and you need to understand that that's the case, and that they will, and really what I'm trying to say is that you've got to follow their advice. Don't second guess their advice, because unless you know it to be wrong, they're the ones who set up the tax structures. You need to have a lawyer, and we're not just saying that. Lawyers are really important to make sure that you have your legal protection set up and in place so that you can go forward with your business. There are lots of different rules and regulations that govern a business, and you really need to make sure that you understand them all. And if you don't, then that's when you're going to fall foul of laws, and you can get into lots of trouble if you haven't got the right advice from your lawyer. And they can also help with starting up structures to make sure that you're protected legally. Remember that your situation will be different from all of your friends and family. If you own other property, if you own other assets in certain structures, then you need to get legal advice to make sure that you're being protected moving forward. So that's why a lawyer is really appropriate. And the third person that I would say is some sort of business mentor or coach. Now, there's a lot of, let's say, misconceptions about business coaches. And look, I'll be honest, there are a lot of dodgy business coaches out there. So you need to do your research and find a good one, because most of us, and Craig and I know this from our experience, when we came out of being lawyers in a law firm in Brisbane City, we had no idea how to run a business. We identified that and got ourselves a coach who's now turned into a mentor to actually help us run our business and teach us what we actually need to do. You shouldn't try and do it all yourself. Business can be a very lonely place, even with business partners, even with employees. So, yes, it's a cost, and yes, you need to find the right one. But a good business coach or mentor is worth their weight in gold to make you understand what you're doing and running a business. So, Craig, they're the three, I would say, most important roles and people that you have in your initial team.
Yeah, absolutely, 100% agree. And go out there, find your initial team. You mightn't find the right person straight away. You need to ask around, word of mouth referrals, those sorts of things, to try to find the best initial team that's suited to you. All right, so moving along into part of, I guess, due diligence for when you're starting probably more a new business, and it's regarding the right name and the right market that's appropriate for your product or service. So why do you see it is important to choose the right name for your business?
Yeah, great question, Craig. And look, there's a little bit of controversy over this. Some people say the name doesn't matter, but at the end of the day, choosing the right name, it can be really a tricky aspect of any new business. The name is the thing that the people will use to identify your product, your service, your business, whatever. They'll use it to identify you. And it's the name that you'll hope that will become known as you and your success. Often people spend way too long thinking about their name and trying to work out what it should be and not get on with their business. So this is a danger that you need to avoid. Once you have a name, you need to consider whether it is unique. As we've talked about previously, there are literally thousands of advertisements per day that people see. There are literally thousands and thousands of businesses, not just in Australia, but worldwide. And when people see all of those advertisements, all of those names of businesses, they just go through it. I know this. I walk around, and I live in a suburb of Brisbane, Bulimba, and we have a street called Oxford Street, which has heaps of businesses on it. But I couldn't tell you what they were. And I go down there on a regular basis because I get literally pounded with names and advertisements every day. So it's unlikely that even with a catchy name, you're going to be the next Google. But you need to have a name which is actually going to be synonymous with your product or service. So there are a bunch of different ways to do this. However, probably the best way is to think about the name and then go and do some searches. The first thing to do is start out with a Google search, a simple Google search, or a Bing search or other search engines are a great place to start to see whether or not there is any competing business with your business. At these days, the search engines go through every page on the internet, and they'll be able to help you find the right name. And don't just look at the first page. I can't remember what the statistics are, but it's quite extraordinary that it's probably close to 75-80% of people never go past the first page of a Google search. Well, if you're looking for a business that might have a similar name, look as far as page 20. Yes, it's going to take some time, but you're going to find out about it. And if you're serious about this business, you need to invest the half an hour or so that it will take you to go through that many search results. You can also go to website purchase businesses like GoDaddy or Crazy Domains, and they have lists of business names that are available. Or you can type in the name of the business of the business that you want to start, and that will have help you find out the name. So you'll need to have that search done. Another good place to start is any business name register. So in Australia, you can go to the ASIC, Australian Securities and Investment Commission website, which is asic.gov.au. We'll link that in the show notes. And you can do searches on names of businesses that are currently trading. And finally, if you want to do searches of trademarks, registered trademarks, then you can go to IP Australia, which is ipaustralia.gov.au. Even if you just Google IP Australia trademark search, it'll take you to the page where you can do a search of the name. So you really need to do your research. Think about the name. Don't spend too long on it. Make sure that once you pick the name, that you actually do the searches to make sure that it's unique and you're not going to have any problems trading it going forward.
Absolutely. All right. So that's the finding the right name. Following from that, obviously you need to look at the market for your business. So how do you go about finding the right market? And specifically, which is something we've spoken about previously, is working out your ideal customer or client for your business.
Yeah, this is so important. Something that we didn't do early on in our business, but once we got coaching on this, we did it, and we can see that you and I saw the value in this. So with any product or service, you need to make sure that you have a market in which to sell that product or service. That may sound simple enough, but you would be amazed at how many people just start a new business without doing any research. So the easiest way to look at what you would need to do on your business and whether or not you're going to have a market is to go through an ideal client. Work out who that client will be. We've talked about previously in previous shows about ideal clients, and actually, we've got resources, and we'll link those in the show notes to actually do your ideal client and actually work out who that is. So your ideal client is the person that you will most like to work with. They're the person who give you the greatest pleasure and greatest reward. So you need to ask yourself the question: is it who that person is, and who do you get a kick out of actually helping? Start from there. Then you need to sit down and work out what they like, where they dine, what sports they watch, what do they like to read, all those things, because you need to work out how you're actually going to find them. So as I said, we'll link in the show notes the previous show that we did on this topic so that you can see that and you can run through the ideal client exercise on that. But this is really important because your ideal client actually shows you where you're going to work. And really, that can be the biggest pitfall in business, is not doing that and then not defining the market for your business, because you can't be servicing everyone. The world has too many different businesses out there, too many different clients, too many different customers, too many different competitors, that you need to stand out from the crowd. So you need to, I don't like the word niche, but if you think about the niching down, that can be a good way to think about it as well, to niche down to really find that market for your business. And you can always expand later on. You can always expand into different clientele in the future, but really thinking about that, the ideal client and then the right market really will set you up for success and set you up for a successful business.
Absolutely. All right, there are all the questions I had down. All the information is vital, not only for a person that's looking at starting a new business or buying a new business as in conception, but a number of the answers to the questions is also relevant to someone that's in an existing business and needs to take it to the next level or to the next phase. They need to look at these sorts of things. If they don't have them in place, they need to look at the initial team, the planning, ensuring that they've got their ideal client, the right market sorted out, that they do have the right name. So those sorts of questions they can be asking themselves in an existing business, or as the show is targeted today, is to phase one conception. Is there anything else of importance that you wanted to add, Jeremy, before we wrap up today's show?
Yeah, I think we've covered quite a bit today, and there is quite a bit in this phase and the next phase, which is phase 2 startup. And what I would like to encourage everyone to do, as per normal, we have a workbook that goes with this episode. If you're watching this on Facebook, you can download it from the link below. I've posted that below. If you are watching or listening to this on the podcast, or you're watching this on the replay, then go to our website, businesslegallifecycle.com.au/138 for the show notes, and you'll see the workbook there. This is something that you need to get right. If you start off the foundations of your business properly, you're going to get the business set up the best way for you for the future. And you're going to set yourself up and give yourself the best chance of success going forward. So run through what we've put together. Get the advice. Go and talk to an accountant. Go and talk to a lawyer at a bare minimum. If you think you know how to run a business, then don't go and get advice from a coach. but I can tell you that most people think they know how to run a business and they don't. Go and get the advice. Go and find out what you need to have in place. Get it done correctly. Take the advice. Make sure that the consultants talk to each other as well. There's nothing worse than an accountant who tells you to do X, a lawyer that tells you to do Y, and then you're stuck in the middle and you don't know what the actual right way is. Know that they've got to talk to each other. Know that you've got to have communicated where you're going and what you're doing. And if you want advice, we're more than willing to help. We always say this in every episode, and people do. They email from time to time, and they make comments from time to time. Email us, post comments. We'll come back to you. We'll give you advice, but we'll even give you recommendations for consultants if you're looking for them in Australia, because this is really important to get right. And I don't like to harp on things too much, but we've seen it time and time again with startup businesses that skip phase 1 conception. They skip going through these important things. They dive straight into it, and then they come to us 2-3 years later with a business that, look, it might be doing well, but it's costing them lots of money and lots of heartache. So, in answer to the question of what else is, really get the advice. Whether you follow our workbook, go and get advice from your consultants, do that, and you'll find that you won't know what you've saved yourself, what problems you saved yourself from. That's just life. Part of our job is to be proactive and not reactive. So get the advice, and you'll set yourself up for success. I can guarantee it.
Absolutely, brilliant advice to get the right advice. Alrighty, so that's it for today. As Jeremy said, the show notes will be on the website under show 138. We'll be back again on Monday for Fast Fix Monday, so please join us then. We're talking more about the benefits of planning in this phase of your business. So, as I said, thanks for joining us. We'll see you again next time.
See you next time.